There exists a creature similar to the Skinwalker or Wendigo that is not either of those monsters, but something uniquely disturbing. Whatever it truly is appears to haunt the lands of the Four Corners region, and it likes to find people to stalk for months at a time, some who disappear forever. A viewer by the name of Visibond24 sent me this story titled, "It Can Only Be the Fleshgate," which tells of his terrifying encounter with something that may be even the Navajo's worst fear. I haul livestock for a living. Cattle mostly, sometimes horses. I run this independent operation out of New Mexico, which means I own my own rig, and I've been on contracts, and I spend more nights sleeping in my cab than I do in my own apartment. If it's not obvious to you, this is not the life I planned for myself. But it is the life I've got, and after 11 years, I've kind of made a peace with it. The route that changed everything came to me in March of last year. A logistics company I'd been trying to get on with for 2 years had a contract hauling beef cattle between ranches and auction houses across the Four Corners region: Arizona, New Mexico, a little bit of Utah, and Colorado. Territory where you drive for hours without seeing another vehicle, where your cell signal dies and doesn't come back, and where the land looks the same in almost every direction, until you start to feel like you're not moving at all. The runs were long but not unreasonable, and the company had a reputation for treating their independent haulers fairly. Judging by how much they offered to pay, that reputation turned out to be true. When the dispatcher called and offered me the route, I said yes before she finished talking. She told me the prior driver had quit, just like that, mid-contract, no notice. He walked away from a rig worth $90,000 and a route that paid better than anything else in that region. She said he refused to explain why, said he would not return their calls. I asked if something had happened, maybe some kind of accident, or perhaps some drama with one of the ranches. She thought for a moment, then came back with a no. There was nothing like that. She said sometimes guys just burned out. The isolation got to them. It happens. I didn't push it then. I needed the work, and that sounded like a good explanation to me. The first run was a Monday. I picked up 32 head of Angus from a ranch on the Arizona side of the reservation and hauled them southwest toward a feedlot a few hours away. This was a typical route, which I'd done 100 times before on other contracts. Nothing special about it. 8 hours of driving, broken up by mandatory rest stops, an overnight layover at a ranch along the way to let the animals rest and water. Then another 4 hours to the destination. The loading went without a hitch. The cattle were calm, which isn't always the case in this business. Some herds spook easy, especially if they've been handled rough or if there's weather coming. But these were good animals. They were well managed, and they walked up the ramp into the trailer without much of a fuss. I checked my water tanks, checked the ventilation, did my walk around, then I pulled out before noon. The drive was so quiet. I listened to the radio until the stations faded to static. Then I drove in silence for a long while. The land out there helps to empty your head. You see just red rock and scrub brush and sky so big, it makes you feel like you're at the bottom of something, instead of on top of it. To be honest, I've always liked that feeling. Some guys hate the isolation, but I've never minded being alone. I made my first rest stop around 4 in the afternoon. Federal regulations say you have to give livestock a chance to rest and rehydrate every so often, so I pulled off at a wide spot in the road, got out, and walked back to check on the herd. They were fine. They were standing in loose groups the way cattle do. A few of them were drinking from the trough. I counted heads, to be sure, checked for injuries, and I made sure nobody was down. Everything was A-OK. But when I started walking back to the cab, I stopped. I'm not sure why, there wasn't anything to see. The desert around me stretched on in every direction, flat, dotted with juniper and sage, empty all the way to the horizon. There were no other vehicles or landmarks, nothing moving. I stood there for a few seconds, just looking. There was this feeling inside me, like I was forgetting something. I think we're all familiar with that feeling. It was like I left the stove on or missed an appointment. It became a nagging itch at the back of my skull. Something was wrong and I simply couldn't figure it out. I shook it off, telling myself if it was something that wrong, I would have remembered it. I got back in the truck. Later on, the overnight stop was at a ranch about 40 miles off the main highway. The rancher who owned the property was a guy who had been running cattle out there for decades. The company I drove for had an arrangement with them. Their haulers could use his property as a rest stop, water the animals, sleep in their cabs for the night. In exchange, the company paid him a monthly fee, and his hands would help with loading and unloading. I pulled in around 7. The sun was going down, a long, slow fade. The rancher wasn't around, but one of his hands met me at the gate, showing me where to park. He was a young, maybe 25-year-old guy, and didn't talk much. He helped me run the cattle into a holding pen where they could spread out for the night, then pointed toward a water spigot where I could refill my tanks in the morning. I asked him if the rancher would be around later. He said probably not. I asked if there was anything I should know about the area, any problems with the route or the prior driver. He looked at me for a moment, reminded me of someone trying to make a decision in their head, then shrugged and said he didn't know anything about that. I thanked him and he left. I ate dinner in my cab. Nothing beats a microwave burrito from a gas station, a bag of chips, bottle of water. I sat there for a long time, watching the last light bleed out of the sky. The cattle were quiet in their pen. I could see them through the windshield, dark shapes against a darker ground. Nothing moving much. I don't remember what time I fell asleep. I don't remember dreaming either. I woke up once during the night, and right away I couldn't tell what had pulled me out of my sleep. There was no alarm or loud noise that I recall, just I was suddenly conscious, and my heart was beating a little faster than it should. So I lay there in the dark, quietly, and I listened. The cattle were making noise. They weren't very loud, so they weren't panicked, but they did seem restless. They were shuffling about. There was a few low sounds, not quite mooing, more like the noise they make when something's bothering them, but even they may not be sure what it is. I sat up and looked through the windshield toward the pen. I couldn't see very much. There was no moon that night, or if there was, it was behind clouds. Just the vague shapes of the cattle pressed together into a mass. They'd moved to the far side of the pen, all of them, packed real tight against the fence. I could see the dark bulk of them clustered there, facing away from the open desert, facing away from the dark. Wanting to know what they were up to, I watched for a while. The sound of them settled down after a few minutes, and whatever had bothered them seemed to pass. Coyotes probably, I said to myself. Maybe a mountain lion somewhere in the distance. Animals are real keen about predators sometimes, especially compared to humans. I told myself that was it. Likely just coyotes. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling of the cab for a while before I fell asleep again. In the morning, I got up with the sun and walked out to check on the herd. They were calm now, standing in normal, loose groups, drinking from the trough, acting like nothing had happened the night before. I counted heads. All 32 accounted for. I was walking back to the truck when I noticed marks had been left in the dirt. There was a patch of bare ground between the pen and where I'd parked. Dusty, flat, the kind that holds tracks real good. I'd walked across it the night before, and I could still see my boot prints from then, scuffed and unremarkable. But the remarkable part was what was next to them. Next to my tracks, maybe 10 feet from my driver's side door, there was something else. A drag mark, about 6 or 7 feet, like something heavy had been pulled across the ground, or like something had been crawling on its belly. I crouched down and looked at it. The edges were smooth, not the kind of mark an animal would leave. No paw prints around it either, no hoof prints. Just one long furrow in the dust, slightly curved. Whatever made it had been moving slowly, from the looks of it. It ended about 3 feet from my truck, right around where I'd been sleeping. I lost track of time looking at it. Eventually, I stood up, finished my walk around, and got back on the road. I finished that first run without any other problems. I delivered the cattle to the feedlot and collected my paperwork. Then I drove back empty to pick up the next load. The drag mark in the dirt stayed with me for a few days, but I tried not to dwell on it. I mean, you can see some weird stuff in the desert if you're around it enough, including but not limited to strange animal behavior and tracks that don't make sense. Over the next few weeks, I settled into the route. There was a nice rhythm to the work. Pick up cattle at one of 4 or 5 ranches scattered across the reservation and the land around it. Haul them to feedlots or auction houses. Rest overnight at designated stops and do it all again. The money kept coming in, and I started to think the dispatcher had been right about the last driver. Some guys just don't handle isolation well. I got to know the regulars too. There was a ranch hand named Miguel, who worked at one of the loading sites on the Arizona side, and he was the guy you wanted on the other end of a cattle chute. He was very quiet and very efficient. He knew how to move animals without spooking them. We'd started loading before dawn most days, 4 or 4:30 in the morning, working by the lights mounted on the barn while the sky was still black. As I said, Miguel was quiet. He never said much, but I did notice he had a habit of watching the desert while he worked. He'd be guiding a steer up the ramp, and his eyes would drift out past the fence line, scanning the dark like he was expecting to see something. One time early on, I asked about it. He shrugged at me and said it was an old habit. His grandmother used to tell him not to turn his back on the open desert after dark. He said it like a joke, but he didn't laugh. There was a truck stop about an hour east of the reservation border, where I'd fill up between runs. The place was called Hal's, or at least that's what the sign said, though I never met any guy named Hal. The woman who ran the register was Navajo, and looked to be in her 70s, with gray hair pulled back tight, and a very kind-looking face. Her name was Dorothy, which seemed wrong somehow, too ordinary for someone who looked like she'd been there since before the highway existed. She was also quiet. Must have been the norm around here. But she would nod at me when I came in, and sometimes she'd ask how the drive was. I got the sense that she was asking about more than just traffic or weather. One night I mentioned the prior driver to her. I was paying for a diesel and a coffee, and I don't know why I brought it up. Guess I was trying to make conversation. I said I had taken over a route from a guy who quit suddenly, and I was curious if she knew anything about it. She then asked which route. I told her. She nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something she already suspected. Then she handed me my change and said I should be careful driving at night. She said it flat, no emphasis anywhere, very mundane-like. I waited for her to say more, but she just turned away and started to restock the cigarettes behind the counter. I left without another word. The other truckers on the CB were a mixed bag. Mostly guys like me, independents running livestock or freight across the empty parts of the state. A few of them had been working the area for years, and late at night, when the roads were dead and there was nothing to do but drive, sometimes you'd hear them chatting. There was a guy who called himself Nighthawk. I never met him in person, and I never saw his rig, but I heard his voice on the radio a few times a week. He had opinions about everything: government cover-ups and secret military bases. He said things lived underground. I swear he was the kind of guy who'd blame a flat tire on a conspiracy. Mostly I just tuned him out. But one night he started talking about something that made me pay attention. He said that there was something out on the roads, something that had been around for a long time, but was getting bolder. He said the tribes knew about it, and had known about it for generations, but they wouldn't talk about it with outsiders. He said it wasn't a skinwalker, and it wasn't a wendigo. It wasn't any of the things white people like to name because they'd seen them in movies or on the internet. He said it was older than the names, and it was hungry. Then someone else on the channel told him to shut up, that he was going to scare the new guys. Nighthawk laughed and said the new guys should be scared. After that, I turned off the radio. Just another conspiracy nut trying to entertain himself on a long haul, I told myself. There was nothing out here but coyotes and empty road. Around Run 6 is when I saw it. I was maybe 3 weeks into the contract. The route had become familiar by then, almost boring. I knew which stretches had cell service and which didn't, and where the potholes were, which rest stops had working bathrooms. That's an important thing to note. I'd stopped thinking about the drag mark in the dirt at all. I'd even stopped thinking about Miguel watching the desert or Dorothy telling me to be careful. It was late, around 11 at night. I was driving an empty trailer back from a delivery, taking a back road that cut through reservation land. The only light that night came from my headlights on the road. I came around a curve and something was on the side of the road. My headlights caught it for maybe 2 seconds, maybe less than that. It was pale. That's the first thing I registered. Pale like something that had never seen sunlight. White like a grub when you turn over a rock. It was low to the ground, close to the dirt, and for a split second, I thought it was a person who had been hit by a car. Someone crawling on their hands and knees in agony. Then it moved. And it didn't move like a person, nor any animal I'd ever seen. It shifted its weight and turned toward the light, and I saw the shape of it change in a way that didn't make sense, like all its joints were backwards. And then it was gone, off the road into the dark, so fast I couldn't track it anymore. I did not slow down at all. My foot stayed on the gas, and I kept my eyes on the road ahead. I drove for another 20 minutes before I realized my hands were all shaky. I told myself what I'd just seen was a sick, mangy coyote. That could explain the pale color, the strange way it moved. Coyotes with mange lose their fur and their skin can go gray or even white. They can look like something from a nightmare. I'd seen pictures of them. It made so much sense at the time, except for the size. Mange doesn't make an animal bigger, and whatever I'd seen on the side of that road, curled low against the ground, had been big. At least the size of a fully grown man, maybe bigger. I didn't plan on telling anyone just yet. The run right after that was much worse. I was hauling a full load, 28 head of cattle, from a ranch near the Utah border, down to an auction house outside of Flagstaff. It was a 2-day trip with an overnight stop at the same ranch where I'd seen the drag mark. The weather was clear, the roads were good, and everything was routine. I was on a long, straight stretch of highway, about 2 hours from the overnight stop, when the cattle started screaming. Now, that's not the right word. Cattle don't scream. They bellow, they low, they make that deep groaning sound when they're stressed out. But this wasn't the same as that. It was a sound I'd never heard them make before in all my 11 years of hauling livestock. This was ragged and high-pitched, as if they were being actively torn apart. I pulled over as fast as I could and hit the hazards. I jumped out and ran back to the trailer. The whole rig was shaking. I could feel it through the ground. The vibration of 30,000 pounds of animal trying to get away from something. I got to the side of the trailer and looked through the ventilation slats. They were grouped against the far wall, all of them crushing each other against the metal, climbing over each other, a mass of bodies pressed as far from the roadside of the trailer as they could go. Their eyes were rolling white and their mouths were open, making that sound. I looked at the roadside of the trailer. Nothing was there. Empty road, empty desert. Nothing. I stood there for a few minutes, waiting for my heart to calm down. The cattle eventually settled too. The screaming faded to heavy breathing and then to silence. After a good 10 minutes, they started to spread out again. Still nervous looking, bunched tighter than normal, but no longer panicked. I walked around the trailer twice, checking every inch of it, checking the road in both directions. But I didn't find a single trace of what might have spooked them. It was just me and the cattle and the empty dark around us. I got back in the cab, and I sat there, taking deep breaths. Then the CB crackled. There was a voice I didn't recognize, faint and breaking up, but it came through well enough for me to hear it. "You okay there, driver? Saw you pulled over." I picked up the handset. Yeah, I'm fine. Cattle got spooked by something, not sure what." The static came back for a moment, and then I heard, "What mile marker are you at?" I told him. Then there was more static. When the voice came back, it was quieter. "Oh, that's a bad stretch. Don't stop there too long. Not longer than you have to, okay?" "What do you mean, bad stretch?" But the channel had gone dead. I tried raising him again, and I tried a few other channels too, but I got nothing more than static after that. I put the truck into gear, and I drove. I made it to the overnight ranch just before midnight. The rancher's hand was there to meet me. It was a different guy this time, an older guy. He helped me unload the cattle into the pen and did not ask why they were so skittish, why they practically ran down the ramp to get out of the trailer. That night it was difficult to fall asleep. I sat in my cab with the doors locked and the parking lights on, and I watched the desert until the sun came up. Nothing happened. The cattle stayed calm. The night passed by without incident. But in the morning, when I went to check on the herd, I found something. One of the steers had a mark on its side, a scrape about 4 inches long, right behind the shoulder. It wasn't deep, and hadn't really broken the skin, but the hair was gone in a thin line like something had rubbed against it. Something with a rough surface. Perhaps something that could reach through the slats of the trailer while we were parked on that empty stretch of road. I loaded the cattle and got back on the highway, and I did not stop again until I reached the auction house. I started dreading the overnight stops. It wasn't something I admitted to myself right away. I just noticed that I was driving a little faster toward the end of each run, trying to shave off time, trying to make it to the next destination before I had to pull over and sleep. When that wasn't possible, I'd park under lights, if there were any, or close to buildings, close to people. I tried to tell myself it was common sense, safer that way. After my last run, the dispatcher called me to say the client was happy with my work. I was giving them on-time deliveries, no losses, cattle arriving in good condition. She asked if I was settling into the route okay. I said yeah, everything was fine. She paused for a second, then said the prior driver had been good too, for a while. So, she said, if I ever needed to talk about anything, I could call her, anytime. I thanked her and hung up. And then I sat there in the truck stop parking lot, wondering what the heck that was supposed to mean. The next week, I stopped at Dorothy's place to fuel up. It was late afternoon. The sun was already getting low. and I had another 2 hours to drive before the overnight ranch. I filled the tanks, checked my tires, and went inside to pay. Dorothy was behind the counter like always. She rang me up without saying much, and I was about to leave when I stopped at the door. I'm not sure why I said it. I think I needed to tell someone. Maybe I thought she'd laugh and tell me I was being stupid, and that would be the end of it. I said I'd seen something on the road a few nights back. She didn't look up from the register. She asked what kind of something it was. I said that I wasn't sure. Maybe a person on the side of the road, out past mile marker 60-something. I said whoever it was looked really sick and pale. I said I didn't stop because something about the way they moved didn't sit right with me. Dorothy was now staring at me. Her face had changed. She was looking at me like I had told her someone had died, but she'd been expecting the news. She then asked if it saw me. I didn't know how to answer that. I told her I thought so, that it had turned toward my headlights. She did that slow nod again. Then she explained it was good I didn't stop. She said whatever I did, I should never stop for it. Ever. Not even if it looked like someone I knew. I waited for an explanation, but there was none. She didn't offer one. She handed me my receipt instead, then turned away. I asked her what it was. She was quiet for so long, I thought she hadn't heard me or didn't want to answer. I was about to leave when she said that it didn't have a name, or she didn't know if it did. She said her grandmother used to tell her stories about things men are not supposed to speak of, in places men fear to dwell. She said that such things were mostly gone now, or just sleeping, but not all of them. Some of them were still out there. She then said she had other customers to help, even though the store was empty. I took the hint and what information I could get, then left. The overnight stop that night was at a different ranch, one that I'd only used once before. A smaller operation, just a few hundred acres, run by an older couple who didn't ask questions. They had a pen set up near an old barn and a spigot for water, and that was about it. They didn't have any hands to help with unloading, and no lights except what came from the house a few hundred yards away. I got the cattle settled around 8. By myself, it took a bit longer. I fed them, watered them, and checked for injuries. They were calm enough. No repeat of the screaming from before, thank God. But they still clustered together, tighter than they should have. I'd started to notice that. Every herd I hauled now did the same thing at night. They would be very tightly grouped, facing inward, like they were circling against something. I ate dinner in my cab and watched the dark come down. And around 10, I smelled something. It was faint at first. I thought maybe one of the cattle had gotten sick, or something had died nearby. It was a sour and sweet smell, like rotten meat. I got out and walked over to the pen, shining my flashlight through the rails. The cattle appeared to be fine, alive and standing, grouped up in the far corner of the pen like they were before. But one of them was making a strange sound, so low I could barely hear it. I'd never heard cattle hum before. I listened for a moment. The other cattle were silent. It was just that one, humming to itself, staring at the dark beyond the fence. And as it did, that smell grew stronger. I walked around the pen checking for carcasses or anything that might explain it, but I didn't see anything strange. I walked out past the fence line and into the scrub, sweeping my flashlight across the ground. No dead things, nothing rotting. All I found was dirt and rocks, but the smell kept building up. There was a thickness to it now, coating the back of my throat, almost enough to make me gag. So I stopped walking and stood very still. The wind was blowing right at me, coming from the desert and blowing towards the pin. So that meant it was coming from out there, whatever was making that smell. And whatever it was coming from, it was close enough to smell. I turned around and walked back to my truck quickly, but I didn't run, even though I desperately wanted to. I got in the cab and locked the doors, and I sat there with a pounding heart, watching the desert through the windshield like I had so many nights before. Eventually, that smell did fade. I think it took about an hour, and once it was gone, the cattle looked more comfortable, except that one steer never stopped humming. I tossed and turned, trying to sleep, but I don't think I did. In the morning, I found tracks around the pen. They weren't the same as before. These were footprints, barefoot and human-shaped, pressed deep into the dirt, like whoever had made them was heavy. They circled the pen 3 times, staying about 10 feet from the rails, and never coming any closer. Then they led off into the desert, and disappeared on the hard, packed ground. And the stride was insane. I'm 6 foot even, and I could not match that stride without having to jump. A few days later, I met the other trucker. I was at a rest stop near the state line, one of those big ones with a diner and showers and a few dozen parking spots for long-haul rigs. I'd stopped to eat and clean up, maybe talk to some other drivers, just to hear some human voices that weren't coming through a CB speaker. The diner was mostly empty at the time. There were a few guys at the counter and one family in a booth by the window. But that was it. I took a seat at the far end, ordering a coffee and a burger, and I didn't expect anyone to bother me. But this guy sat down across from me without even asking. He was an older man, maybe 60 years old. He was wearing a faded cap with a trucking company logo, one that I didn't recognize. He said he'd seen my rig in the lot, and he asked if I was the one running the livestock route through the reservation. I said yeah. He nodded slowly. Then he asked if I'd seen it yet. I didn't answer him right away. I looked him over first, trying to figure out if this was a joke, if someone had put him up to it. But he looked at me, patient and waiting. I said I wasn't sure what he was talking about. He smiled, but it wasn't one of those happy smiles. Then he said, yeah, I did. He said he could tell by the way I was sitting down here, and the way my eyes kept going to the windows. He said he'd seen the same look a few years back, when he first started to see it himself. I swallowed hard. So then I asked, what was it? He shook his head and said that he didn't know. He explained how he'd asked around, talked to locals and other drivers. Everyone thought it was something else. A skinwalker, a wendigo, something in Spanish that he couldn't remember. He said he didn't think any of the names were right. He said it was something older than the names. So then I asked, what did it want? He was quiet for a while. Then he said that he thought it was curious. He said it followed him for nearly a month, showing up at night, getting a little bit closer each time. He said it never attacked, never tried to get inside his truck. Whatever it was, it wanted to watch. I asked what happened after the month. He said, well, he quit the route, took a pay cut, and switched to a different territory. And he hadn't seen it ever since. I then had to know if he thought it would have done something eventually, if he'd stayed. He looked down then back up, and he said yes, he was sure of it, saying that toward the end of the encounters, he had started hearing sounds, strange clicking noises that sounded threatening and inhuman. He left before I could ask anything else, just up and left, like that was the end of some unspoken appointment. He did drop a few bills on the table for his coffee, but walked out right after that. I watched him as he crossed the parking lot and climbed into his rig and pulled away. After that, my appetite wasn't as big as it was before, so my food sat there getting cold. I was thinking about what he said. The ticking sounds. What would I do if I heard it? The worst run came a few weeks later. I almost didn't take the run. The dispatcher called with a last-minute job. 30 head of cattle that needed to move from a ranch on the Utah side down to a buyer near the border. Short notice, a tight deadline, but the pay was extra, and that made thinking it over much more easy than it should have been. From the start, though, the weather was bad. The sky had a yellow-brown tint to it, the kind you see before a dust storm, and it just makes the atmosphere feel sick. Thing is, I checked the forecast before I left, and it said clear. But forecasts don't mean much out here. I guess you could say the land makes its own weather. I picked up the cattle around noon. The rancher seemed eager to get them loaded, what with the sky looking more menacing by the second. I talked about whether he was expecting a storm, and he said maybe. It was hard to tell. But he said that I should probably get moving if I wanted to beat it, just in case. So I got moving. For the first 2 hours, everything was fine. The road was empty and the cattle were calm. The sky just stayed that ugly yellow, but nothing came of it so far. I was beginning to dare to think I'd make it to the overnight stop before anything hit. But then the wind picked up. It came in from the west, hard and sudden, rocking the trailer on its suspension. I could feel the rig wanting to drift away from me, and I had to correct the steering every few seconds to keep it straight. The dust started a few minutes later. It wasn't a wall of dust, not yet, just a haze that cut visibility down to maybe a quarter mile. The yellow sky turned brown, then gray, then something closer to black, even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. I slowed down and put my lights on. I kept on driving. Stopping in the middle of the road seemed worse than just pushing through. The wall hit around 4:30. 1 second I could see the road ahead somewhat, faded and dim but visible. The next second, nothingness. Just dark brown, dirt and grit slamming against the windshield hard enough to sound like hail. The whole truck shuddered in the gusts. I couldn't see the hood of my own rig. I couldn't see anything. So I had to pull over. There was no choice. The shoulder was dirt, and I could feel the tires sink a little as I eased off the pavement. But I got the truck stopped, and I put it in park, killing the engine and sitting there listening to the wind screaming. That dust storm would last 4 hours. I sat in my cab and waited. What else was there to do? The radio was nothing but static, and my phone had no signal. It hadn't had signal out there for a good 50 miles. I couldn't see the cattle in the trailer behind me. I could see nothing but brown-gray nothingness pressing against the glass. I snacked on some crackers I had in the glove box and drank warm water from a bottle and waited. Around 8:30, it died down. It wasn't all at once, but gradual. The wind dropping from a roar to a moan to something like a whisper. The dust thinned out enough that I could see shapes again. The road, then the desert, then the sky, still hazy and no stars. Finally, I got out and I checked on my cattle. They were alive, stressed out, and well dusted, but alive. None of them were down, none of them were injured. They'd literally weathered the storm. I counted heads twice to make sure. All 30 accounted for. I walked around the trailer then, checking the tires, the hitch, the lights. Everything looked okay. The rig was covered in dust too, but functional. I could get back on the road now, make it to the overnight stop in just a couple of hours. I got back in, and the truck wouldn't start. I turned the key and got nothing, not even a click. The battery was so dead, Its soul had been snatched into the afterlife. Or perhaps it was the engine. Maybe the dust had gotten in there and fouled something that I couldn't see. I tried it several more times, knowing it wouldn't work, because that's just what humans do. But I was very clearly stuck, and with no cell signal, and with no radio. And I hadn't seen another vehicle on the road in God knows how long. The overnight ranch was still 40 miles away, much too far to walk, especially at night, especially with 30 head of cattle I couldn't just leave behind. I was gonna have to wait it out until morning. Wait and hope that someone might come along by then, or that the truck just decided to start. Maybe my phone would find some signal by then. I got cozy and locked the doors. The first hour was quiet. I watched the dark settle over the desert, watching the last of the dust haze fade into ordinary night. It was a very dark new moon night, blackness in every direction. Around 10, the cattle started to get restless. I heard them then, shuffling around, hooves on metal and bodies bumping against the trailer walls. Then those low sounds, not quite mooing. It reminded me more of that humming I'd heard before. It was one animal at first, then more of them. A chorus of low vibrations I could feel through the frame of the truck. I turned around and looked through the rear window of the cab. I couldn't see much, just the dark bulk of the trailer behind me. Some vague shapes of cattle moving inside. They were gathering against the far wall again, away from something. I sat very still and listened closely. The wind had died completely. The desert had gone absolutely silent. The blood in my ears was deafening. Then I heard something else. Footsteps circling the truck, something with weight to it that moved on two legs. I could hear it crunching the dirt and gravel outside, the slight drag between steps, a pause as it stopped and then started again. It was walking around me, taking its time. I didn't move. I tried not to breathe. I sat in the dark cab with my hands on the steering wheel, and I listened to it circling. Once, twice, 3 times. Each loop taking maybe 2 minutes. Moving slow enough, I could track its position by sound alone. On the 4th circuit, it stopped at the driver's side door. Then there was silence. I could feel it out there. I know it doesn't make sense, but I could feel it. A presence of something taking up space in the dark only a few feet away from me. The cattle had gone completely silent too. No more humming or moving. Even they were too afraid to shift at all. But then I heard breathing. It wasn't coming from me or the cattle. It was coming from outside the window, inches from the glass. These long, slow, moist breaths, like a dog sniffing the air put into slow motion. Sounded like it was tasting the air rather than smelling it. This went on for much too long of a time, several minutes, I think, and all the while I sat frozen, not daring to look toward the window. I stared straight ahead, and I listened to that breathing. Eventually, it moved on. I heard the footsteps again, continuing around the truck, past the hood, around to the passenger side, then back toward the trailer, then nothing. I waited. The cattle started to move and make noise again after maybe 20 minutes. It wasn't a panic, but more like stressed movement. Whatever had been out there, the cows now thought it was gone. But I didn't believe them. Around midnight, I heard it on the CB. I'd been trying the radio every half hour or so, just clicking through channels, hoping to catch another driver or a signal from somewhere. All I got was static, 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 and then on Channel 19, something that wasn't static. It was a voice, broken up, fading in and out, but a voice nonetheless. Of course, I assumed it was another trucker. The cadence was right, that slow drawl guys use when they're tired and just want to hear someone talk. But I couldn't make out the words. It was like listening to a baby trying to speak, but with a man's pitch. I picked up the handset. "This is a stranded driver on Route 160. Can anyone read me? I need assistance." The voice stopped. The channel went quiet, but then it came back, and this time it was clearer. When I heard it, my heart nearly gave out.
"This is a stranded driver on Route 160.
I dropped the handset. The voice kept going, repeating parts of what I'd said, sometimes mixing them up. It was trying different combinations.
Stranded driver, need assistance. Can anyone stranded? Anyone read me, driver?"
I turned the radio off. I sat in the dark and listened to the silence and waited for morning. Sometime around 3, I looked up to the windshield, just randomly, and I saw something. It was standing about 50 yards away, at the edge of where my parking lights could reach. Something tall and thin, standing on 2 legs, with a posture so horrible that it couldn't be human, and all the joints were bent backwards. It had that same grub-like white paleness to it that I'd seen on the roadside long ago. Something that had not only never seen the sun, but was also repulsed by it. And the skin looked wet. It glistened. It didn't move. It stood there, facing my truck, watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I didn't want to. For some amount of time, it stayed like that, with me in the cab and it in the dark, neither of us moving. I know it went on long enough that my eyes began to burn from not blinking. But I was scared to blink. I was scared to take my eyes off of it for even a moment. Because if I lost sight of something like that, I would have lost it. But I was in for something worse. Because I kept watching it, I eventually saw it smile. I saw the movement from that distance, the lower part of its face practically splitting open, widening and going too far. Not a human smile at all. Not any kind of smile that belonged in the world of the living. It held that expression for a long time. Then it dropped down to all fours in a single fluid motion and crawled. It was so fast. My very first thought when I saw that was that no man could outrun it if it crawled at them. I'd never been so thankful to be surrounded by metal and glass. It crawled away into the distance until I could no longer see it. And I stayed awake, not wanting to close my eyes for even a second. I watched for any movement. When the sun finally came up, the truck started on the first try. I made the delivery that morning. I drove those last 40 miles in a kind of daze, my hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, but my mind wasn't there. It was somewhere else. The cattle were fine, and the buyer was happy. I collected my paperwork and drove away, and I don't remember any of the rest of the drive. I do know that I called the dispatcher that afternoon and told her I was done. And she was not surprised. She asked if something had happened, and I said no. Just time for a break for me. She said she understood, and that route particularly was hard on people, and she said if I ever wanted to come back, the work would be there. I said thanks, and I hung up. For about a week, I thought that was the end of it. I stayed in my apartment in town and didn't take any jobs, and I barely left my own building. I was like a kid again, but not in the happy way that phrase usually implies. No, I slept with my lights on and the TV still playing, and I told myself the boogeyman was not actually real. What a joke. But my money ran out, as it often does. That's the thing about being independent. No work means no pay, and no pay means the bills stack up quick. Truck payment, insurance, rent, food, all the things people gotta have. I'd been doing okay on the cattle route, putting some aside, but apparently not enough. After 10 days of nothing, I was looking at my accounts and doing math. Stressful math. I started calling around for other work. Different routes, easier cargo. There was a furniture company that needed a driver for a run to California. A construction outfit was looking for someone to haul equipment up to Colorado. I took what I could get. I was back to normal long hours and boring roads. Nothing in the dark, except my own headlights. I started to relax, started to think maybe I would never see anything like that again. After all, the other trucker, the one I'd met at the diner, he said that the incidents stopped once he changed routes, once he got away. But I was wrong. A couple weeks after I quit the cattle route, I was hauling a load of building materials up through the mountains. A late-night run with empty roads. I came around a bend, and my headlights caught something on the shoulder. Pale, low, gone before I could really process it. Just a deer, a coyote, anything, I told myself. But I knew what it was. I knew I'd been followed. A few nights later, I was parked at a rest stop near the state line, trying to sleep in my cab. I woke up around 2 a.m., that same sudden alertness from before. I looked out the windshield. It was standing at the far end of the parking lot, under a light that flickered every few seconds. Tall, motionless, and watching. I started the truck, and I drove until sunrise. After that, I saw it every few days. Never close, never approaching, but always there, it seemed. At the edge of a gas station lot or on an overpass as I drove under. Standing in a field beside the highway, visible for a split second. It was following me. It was following me, and the route didn't matter. I went back to Dorothy's place on a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't even hauling anything. I wasn't supposed to be there. I got in my truck and drove until I was at Dorothy's. She was alone behind the counter when I walked in, and she watched me approach without saying a word. I told her I'd quit the route, and I asked, what does it want from me? Why is it following me? How do I make it stop? She came around the counter and sat down on one of the old chairs by the window, moving like her old bones hurt. She gestured for me to sit across from her. She explained she'd known people this had happened to before. Not many, a handful over the years, going back to when she was young. She said most of them left the area and never came back, and she didn't know what happened to them after that. She said a few had stayed, and eventually the sightings did stop, and they would live out their lives without ever seeing it again. So I wondered out loud, what made the difference? She shook her head. She said she wasn't sure. Her grandmother apparently had some theories, old stories about things that chose people for reasons nobody knew. Said that sometimes things like that just watched. Perhaps at one point they wanted something with an individual and eventually lost interest and moved on. With a gulp, I asked what had been on my mind. What happened to the ones who didn't get lucky? She said they disappeared. One by one, over months or years, they went out into the desert and simply did not come back. She said those that never came back would report hearing clicking sounds before their disappearance. Others reported hearing a voice that sounded very familiar. I instantly thought about the thing I'd heard on the CB radio. I begged her to tell me what I should do. She didn't know. Said the old advice was to never answer when it called and never follow when it led, and to never look it in the face. Beyond that, all anyone could do was wait and hope it lost interest, and she didn't know how long that might take. I thanked her and left after that, driving back home, thinking about everything she'd said. I kept working. I had to. But every run I did felt like borrowed time, like a gamble I might not win. I started driving with a partner whenever I could. Another trucker buddy of mine who didn't ask questions when I said I didn't like running solo anymore. And somehow, the thing didn't show up whenever my friend was in the cab with me. But my friend had his own routes and his own life, and he couldn't be there every time. The very last time I saw it was about 6 months after the night in the dust storm. I was running empty back from a delivery, alone, in the middle of the night. The road was straight and flat, and I was exhausted. I shouldn't have been driving, but I had to get home. I came over this small rise, and I had to hit the brakes hard, because there was something in the road. Something standing in my lane on 4 legs, facing my truck, caught fully in the headlights. When I saw its glistening, wet, pale skin, I shuddered. It smiled the same smile I saw before. But then it stepped aside, walking off the road, as if it was letting me through. It stood on the shoulder, even, and it watched me pass as I drove by. I felt like it was telling me something. I didn't speed up and I didn't slow down. I drove normally, and I tried not to scream. That was last year, and I haven't seen it since. But I have had nightmares almost every week. It feels like it's too soon to say that it's gone. I don't want to jinx myself. But I'm so happy, so relieved, that I can go back to normal and not live my life looking over my shoulder forever. All I can tell you people who might be listening to or reading this story is be very careful where you drive in the Four Corners region. Beware the roads after dark and where you lay your head on Navajo land. Trucker stories are among my favorite tales to tell. This one was very chilling, and I even got a bit creeped out myself during the dust storm scene. This idea that something that could drag you away to the darkest and secret places of the desert to never be seen again is merely inches away from you through a flimsy semi-truck door. That is something to keep you awake. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can follow me on X at Dark Prevails. Around this time of year, viewers send me their Spotify Wrapped, and it's so crazy and cool to see so many people who listen to my voice year-round. It reminds me that this show, this channel and podcast, it's nothing without all of you. So thank you. And while I have your ear before I go, for those of you craving a relief from the horror and have a crude, gross sense of humor like I do, and you're an adult, check out my YouTube channel and other podcast, Night Watchers, which you can find on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Come hang out, laugh, and have a more lighthearted time. Until next time, everyone, it's time for me to clock out. But I'll be back again real soon.
I started technically speaking with Chris Wright to explore questions I'm genuinely curious about as a CTO. Real conversations with experts about what's next.
Craigslist is almost never the first place I go when I need to buy something, but sometimes you can get good deals on things that would otherwise be really expensive. At the time, I was searching for new workout equipment. Weights and machines are really expensive to buy new, so Craigslist was the perfect way to find used ones for cheap. Anyways, I scrolled through the site for a few days before eventually finding a posting that looked really good. It was a set of weights for a pretty good deal and was posted only a few hours ago. The poster's name was Mary, so I sent her an email and told her I was very interested in her weight set and would like to pick them up as soon as possible. Mary replied just a few minutes later, saying that she was available tonight when she got home from work at 7. It was a little bit late, but it wasn't too big of a deal for me since I wanted them as soon as possible. I agreed, and she responded with her address. Of course, I looked it up to see where it was and what the house looked like. It was 20 minutes away in a small neighborhood that I was actually familiar with as one of my old friends used to live nearby. The house was regular sized and didn't have any real defining features other than the fact that it looked pretty old, but nothing looked too strange or gave me bad vibes, so that night I drove down there. The place was at the end of the road in a cul-de-sac, so I parked on the side of the house by their mailbox and made my way up to the front door, which was already opened. I didn't want to just walk into the house, so I knocked on the open door a few times to get their attention. A moment later, a man comes down from the hall. Hi, I was supposed to meet with Mary to look at some workout stuff she had posted on Craigslist. The man's face lit up, and he said to come on in. He told me that Mary would be down in a few minutes as she was changing out of her work clothes. This definitely made me cautious, but he sounded genuine and believable, so I followed him into his living room where there was a set of weights on the ground. However, aside from the weights, there was nothing else in the room, no furniture or decorations at all. I think the man saw me looking around, as he quickly said that they were in the process of moving out and that's why they were trying to sell the weights. Still skeptical, I looked at them for a second, but immediately noticed that a few plates were missing. I asked him if this was everything, as I thought I saw more in the pictures. He smiled again, telling me that Mary might know where the other ones are, but then he just stood there looking at me. I got really uncomfortable and asked him if he could go check on Mary to let her know I was here. He waited for a moment, and then he agreed and walked up the stairs. I was obviously beginning to worry that Mary might not even be a real person at this point, so I listened intently to make sure he was talking to someone. After a few seconds of silence, I went over to the bottom of the stairs and looked up towards the top. The man was standing there at the top, just staring at the wall, probably waiting up there to make it seem like he actually went to ask someone. I fell into a panic, knowing now that this was all a lie and I was likely in the middle of something horrible. I started to quickly walk towards the front door, trying not to alert the man, but as soon as I turned around, I heard heavy footsteps rushing down the stairs. He called out for me to wait as I ran straight out the front door and into my car. Strangely, as I drove away, the guy ran out the front door and around the side of the house. I pulled over after driving out of the neighborhood and called the police to let them know what happened, in hopes that they could figure out what was going on. I didn't really know what the man's plan was, but I was confident enough that he was up to something. The officers later came by my house and I gave them more information. They told me that the house I met him at had nobody living there for over a year.
I can't afford to overpay!
Doug, are you hiding from used car shopping?
Maybe?
I'm always here to help.
Show me, Carfox.
Almost half of all used cars have been in an accident. Half! Carfax can show how damage impacts
Which made chills run through my body. Of course, though, I couldn't really give them much helpful information other than a description of what the man looked like. And other than that, all they had to go off of was the weights that he'd put in the empty house that may have fingerprints on them. It worries me that he might still be out there trying to lure people into abandoned homes, but I'm also glad that I was able to make it out of there before he did whatever it was that he planned on doing. I had just graduated college, and I needed a small place to stay while I searched for a new job. I worked part-time at a small grocery store, but now that I graduated, it was time to start looking for a better job. Anyways, apartments were way too expensive to rent on my own, so I was mainly looking for places with spare rooms for rent. I knew it would be awkward for a while living in someone else's house, but I didn't have much of a choice, to be honest. My old roommate from college suggested looking on Craigslist, as most other sites at the time didn't let you post single rooms in a house, or maybe it was just really hard to find them. Either way, Craigslist seemed to have a ton of options to choose from, so I stuck with it. After a few days though, I started to get frustrated, as none of the people would reply to my requests, and the ones that did would just apologize and say it was already taken. But then on Saturday morning, a new room popped up. It was nearby, cheap, and looked pretty nice. In the description, a man named Tom was advertising it as a large house with a spare bedroom for rent that also had a separate bathroom and closet. This sounded perfect to me, so I emailed him about my interest and then went to work. I knew the listing had just been posted that morning, so I felt confident that I was the first one to contact him. On my lunch break, I checked my emails and Tom had replied, asking me to come and view it that afternoon. I knew I'd be tired after work, but I also really wanted this place, so I agreed and we set a time. After work, I drove straight there, which was only about 10 minutes. From the outside, the house looked really nice. It honestly just looked like a regular medium-sized neighborhood home. I parked on the side of the road and walked up to the door, then lightly knocked. After 30 seconds, I knocked again, a little bit harder this time. A minute later, I pulled my phone out to text Tom, but just before I sent it, he opened the door and invited me in. I immediately noticed he was sweating a lot, as if he had just finished a long workout, and he smelled awful. I didn't want to be rude or anything, so I just ignored it. He began walking me around the ground level floor, showing me the kitchen and the living room. He mentioned that he didn't use these rooms often, so I wouldn't have to worry about getting in his way. From the look of the rooms, though, it seemed as though he used them too often. Old dishes were piled up in the sink, and the couch had stains all over it. I really didn't like how dirty the whole place was, and it was strange that in the pictures it looked like the house was really clean. One thing I remembered specifically was that the living room had a brown leather couch in the picture, but the couch that was actually there was black. I figured Tom had probably used the pictures of the house from years ago before it sold. I was a bit annoyed at the dishonesty of it, but all that really mattered was my room, which was upstairs. Tom led the way to the stairs, then stopped when he reached the bottom of the steps and held his hand out in a gesturing manner as if he wanted me to head up first. I got a weird and uncomfortable feeling as I started up the stairs, as Tom didn't follow me. He stayed at the bottom and smiled, saying that my room would be the first one on the left. I continued to the top and took a couple steps into the hallway before a soft thud came from behind the door to what was said to be my room. I looked back down the stairs at Tom, whose smile was now completely gone. Does someone else live here? He replied in an annoyed tone, telling me that it was just one of his friends staying the night and not to worry about it, then urged me to check out the room for myself as he was sure that I'd like it. I was definitely pretty nervous at this point, scared even. Why wouldn't he have told me that someone else was here? It seemed like something that I should know. Everything started adding up, and all I wanted was to get out of there right away. I tried to act confident and began walking down the stairs as I explained that the place wasn't going to work out for me. He didn't seem to like that answer, and he moved his body to block most of the bottom of the stairs. I stood a couple steps away and firmly told him that I needed to leave. He asked me again to check out the bedroom to at least see if I liked it, and again I said I was not interested. He looked at me for a moment. Then, to my surprise, he smiled and said okay, stepping aside. I quickly walked past him and straight out the front door. I don't know what was going on in that house, but something didn't feel right about any of it. I even felt lucky to have been able to leave so easily.
Working across teams is tough, but Asana helps you handle it. That's because Asana is where humans and AI coordinate work together. AI can spot roadblocks and assign work in a snap, so everything and everyone stays on track. That's...
In the moment, I thought I was going to have to force my way out. I checked Craigslist a couple hours later, and the posting had been removed. I still wonder who and what was in that room upstairs. For all I know, it could have just been an empty room, but something tells me that it was something much worse. I lived with a friend of mine, who I'll refer to as Nick, in a small house for a few years during college. He was my roommate for the first year, and then we decided to move out of the dorms and share the rent on a house, since we both had decent enough jobs. This was both of our first times renting a place, so we didn't really know how to budget properly. After a few months, everything was okay, but it was almost a year in when we realized that this place was eating up both of our bank accounts. So the obvious solutions were to either move out or find another roommate. Neither of us wanted to leave, so we started the search for a roommate. We started by asking all of our other friends, but none of them were interested, so really the only option was to put up a post online. I made a post on Facebook Marketplace, and Nick made a post on Craigslist. Again, neither of us have ever done this, and it felt kind of weird, but we knew we didn't have much of a choice. A few weeks went by, with just a couple of responses, but none of them seriously considering moving in, before Nick shows me an email he got from someone named Sam, replying to his Craigslist post. The guy seemed legit, and the following day he came over to view the house. I should mention, he was a couple years older than us, and had just graduated, but he seemed pretty nice, and looked clean and everything, so we were glad to have him. He agreed to the split of rent, and moved in the next week. In the few months following, Sam would hang out with us a lot, and we actually got to know him pretty well. But then all of a sudden, he became very closed off for some reason. Nick and I would barely ever see the guy, and when we did, he wouldn't even talk. He would sit in his room for the most part, with his door shut, and would only come out to get food or to go to work. It didn't bother me necessarily, I just found it a little strange. Anyways, it was around month 4 with him being there that things started to take a turn for the worst. I had just gotten home from work, and immediately as I walked through the door, Nick calls my name quietly from the living room. "What's going on?" He mentions that Sam was home, so to not talk too loud. Then he tells me about a strong smell he noticed when passing his room today. I told him I hadn't noticed it. He points down the hall towards Sam's room and tells me to quietly walk past and see if I notice. So I got up and made my way quietly down the hall towards Sam's door. I didn't even have to get very close to smell what he was talking about. It was awful and really disgusting. I had no idea what it was, and had definitely never smelled it in the house before. Nick suggested we ask him what it was, and I agreed. We both went to his door, trying not to breathe in too hard, and knocked. Then knocked again and again, calling out to him. He didn't answer. Nick said he was sure that Sam was in there, but after a couple more minutes, we just gave up and figured we'd ask him tomorrow. It was already pretty late at this point, so we both made a quick dinner, and then ate while watching TV in the living room, and then we both went to bed. The next day, I caught Sam on his way out of the house and asked him what the smell was last night. I was just taking out the trash. He quickly left and drove off. That answer didn't really make any sense to me, but I didn't want to press him too hard. I told Nick later that day, and he agreed that it was weird, but didn't know what else to do, so we left it at that. Another couple weeks go by. Again, Sam barely talked to us, but the smell had gone away by now. I got home from work late one night, and Nick and Sam were both in their rooms, already asleep probably, so I pretty much went straight up to my room and fell asleep as well. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up hearing some movement below my room, which was where Sam's room was located downstairs. I listened for a couple minutes, trying to figure out what he was doing, but eventually I fell back asleep. The next morning, Sam ran out of the house to go to work as usual. However, he didn't return home that night. Another couple days would go by, and he still hadn't come home. I called him multiple times, and his phone instantly went to voicemail. We were actually starting to get worried and decided to check his room to see if there were any clues as to what was going on. His room was pretty messy and actually kind of looked like a lot of his stuff had been packed up and taken out. I also found a pair of glasses in his drawer with some other random belongings, which was weird because Sam didn't wear glasses. He left some clothes and all of his furniture behind though, which made us believe that he didn't just move out suddenly. Nick ended up calling the police to notify them about Sam possibly being missing, and an officer arrived that night to investigate and ask us questions. We told him everything we knew and let him look at his room. Nick also gave him a picture that we had taken together back when Sam first moved in. After that, we didn't get an update until a week later. A different detective called us and informed us that the identity of the man in the photo with us was not Sam. They said a family member recognized them as their missing son, who had been gone for almost a year. After that, the case got a lot more complicated, and we didn't have much helpful information because the guy pretty much lied about everything he told us. So after a little bit, we lost contact and stopped getting updates. As far as we were told, the man was just some regular guy that was living with his parents, who suddenly went missing for no known reason. He never came back to our house, though, and I'm not sure if he was ever found. It's definitely the most interesting and creepy experience I've had, though. Just knowing that I was living in the same house as someone who made up a completely fake identity and was legally missing gives me chills every time I think about it. It's pretty hard not to assume that this man was trying to hide from the police because of something he had done, or was still doing. I lived in Upper Canada at the time, in a well-sized cabin-type home. The holiday season was always my favorite time of the year, as my family would gather at one of our homes and celebrate Christmas together. Living alone, this was always something to look forward to. I didn't mind being alone, but it was just nice to see some friends and family sometimes. Being in a relatively sizable home, our small family would often either gather at my place or my brother's place, usually taking turns each year. This year, it was my turn to host the family gathering. Most of my family lived on the other side of Canada, though, making it a long drive or a costly plane ride. Typically, though, everyone tries to arrive on Christmas Eve. So, come December 23rd, I called up my brother to make sure everything was going as planned. He informed me that our parents may arrive early Christmas morning due to a flight delay, but he was driving and should make it by the night of Christmas Eve. Wishing him safe travel.
Stuff their stockings with a delicious treat and special edition holiday toy. Kinder Joy.
Travels, I said goodnight and went back to bed. Now, if you've ever lived in Canada, especially further north, you know the winters are brutally cold and long. often snowstorms and blizzards can form suddenly and last for a varied amount of time. That being said, the next day, heavy snowfall covered the grounds in the morning and was accompanied by rushing winds in the afternoon. I received a call from my brother around 6 p.m. notifying me that he was going to have to stay at a motel for the night due to the snowstorm covering the roads. I agreed that it was the safe decision, though I was a bit upset that I'd have to spend the day before Christmas alone, but I tried to stay positive, looking forward to Christmas Day with my whole family. At 10 o'clock, I got ready for bed and set an early alarm for 5 a.m., just in case my parents arrived at the airport early. The wind howling outside the house gave me trouble falling asleep, as it was shaking the whole room and making the whole house creak. But as I laid there annoyed and awake, a soft and rhythmic sound approached from outside the cabin. The wind blowing in all directions at random speeds made the soft 1-2 of the footsteps stand out. They were slow, as you would expect in this kind of weather, but they continued all the way until they reached the wall on the left side of my house. I just laid there with my eyes open, listening to this strange person walking during a blizzard in the middle of the night. A lot of things ran through my head, such as complete confusion and fear of a possible attack. However, I began wondering if it was my brother. Maybe something had happened and his phone didn't have service. Maybe he couldn't find a hotel. The more I had these thoughts, the more I felt I had to find a way to see who it was. In weather like this, nobody could last more than an hour without serious consequences, and I definitely didn't want my brother and his family stuck out there. As I was putting on some heavier clothes, a knock came from downstairs. The odd thing about it was that it was a single knock, and it didn't come from the front door. Hesitantly, I opened my bedroom door and peeked down the stairs. It was far too dark to see anything, but I didn't want to give away my position if it was someone dangerous, so I left the lights off. I walked blindly down the stairs, still listening for any footsteps or sound, but heard nothing aside from the strong winds. As I got to the bottom, I made my way to the front door. While the knock didn't seem to come from the front, I didn't really know what else to do. I'm not sure why, but this was when I really started to get nervous, afraid even. I don't usually say I scare easy, but something just felt very wrong. Approaching the door in silence, I leaned forward and moved the small blinds on the side of the window. A man stood there, looking at the door, looking calm and emotionless. But as soon as he noticed me, he began screaming for me to help him, banging on the window as he stared me in the eyes. I jumped back, not expecting such a sudden reaction. My heart started pounding my chest. The man didn't look well, as in, he looked crazy, and he had one hand in his pocket like he was hiding something. I didn't feel at all comfortable opening the door, but I also didn't want to have the man's blood on my hands for not helping him during a storm like this. What's wrong? How did you get here? I yelled. A few second pause followed before the man answered calmly. I got lost. I just need somewhere to shelter. His shift in attitude was alarming. I stood there, thinking for a bit, before the man asked me again to let him in. Then again and again, getting more aggressive with each word, before beginning to hit the door, pounding on it over and over. I ran to the other room to grab my pistol that I kept in cases of home defense. Then I went back to the front door, though I stood a good distance away and held my ground, hoping he would just leave if I ignored him. He continued banging for well over a minute, but as I stood there, anxiously waiting, I heard again the crunch of footsteps walking around my house. Knowing now that this was for sure a bad situation, I ran upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom. I heard two men start talking soon after, followed by a window shattering and footsteps entering my home. The footsteps scattered around downstairs. I heard things moving and objects clattering before someone began climbing the stairs. My bedroom was the only room upstairs, aside from a half bathroom and closet. Shaking uncontrollably and praying in my head, I held my gun up and aimed at the door as a man approached the other side. Yeah, he's gotta be in here. The man yelled, almost in a cheerful way. He punched the door once, though it sounded heavy, as if he had hit it with a hammer or maybe even a gun. I couldn't help but make a quiet gasp from the terror of it. The man let out a sick, chuckling laugh. Then the other man downstairs yelled something, and both of their footsteps faded away. I sat there with my gun held at the door for probably 15 minutes, with nothing but the sounds of winds blowing downstairs. Clearing the house carefully, I made sure they were gone, then put a small wooden board over the broken window to keep the snow out. The men had taken a few expensive things around the house and left a bit of a mess, but no other harm was done. The blizzard had settled by morning, and I informed my family and the police of the encounter. My brother was angry at himself for not having been there for me, but I assured him it was okay and he made the right call to not drive in a snowstorm. Despite having the most horrifying encounter in my entire life, I actually had a really enjoyable Christmas with my family. People these days are cruel and awful humans, and to do something like that, to put someone through something like that, especially during the holiday season, is just another level of insanity. Christmas was always a big event in my family. Every year, we'd drive out to my aunt and uncle's house where I'd get to see all of my cousins as well as my grandparents. There's one year I still think about a lot though, because something happened that I still can't get out of my head. I was only 10 at the time, and I was a relatively shy kid, so meeting new people wasn't enjoyable at all. This year though, when we arrived at my uncle's house, my oldest cousin introduced all of us to her boyfriend, Drew. Apparently they'd been together for a few years and things were getting pretty serious, so she wanted the whole family to get comfortable with him. From what I heard, they met at the college they both went to, which wasn't far, but Drew was from out of state, so my uncle offered him to stay at his house during winter break. Anyway, over the next couple days, I remember avoiding him as much as possible. I really didn't want to talk to some stranger I didn't know, and I definitely didn't want him to act like he was my big brother. However, my younger brother, who was only 6, was talking to him all the time. It was like they had just become best friends in just 2 days. My parents thought it was cute that my little brother was looking up to him, but I found it to be weird. I don't know, something about it just made me feel uncomfortable. During the nights, I shared a room with my brother, and I'm assuming Drew and my cousin shared a room on the other side of the house. I asked my little brother as we were getting ready for bed why he liked Drew so much, and he just talked about how cool he was. I don't really know what I expected my 6-year-old brother to say, but when he responded, it kind of clicked in my mind that I really should be wondering why Drew wanted to talk to my brother so much, not the other way around. I know this all sounds like it may just be taken into bad context, when it could just be a loving, soon-to-be cousin-in-law, but it was just a feeling in my gut that told me something was off. And just 4 days after we had arrived, and on the night of Christmas Eve, my gut feeling was proven to be right. I specifically remember going to bed that night, noticing my brother having a lot more energy, way more than he should have at that time of night. I thought it was because he was excited about Christmas morning, as I was too, and I went to sleep soon after. Sometime hours later, I woke up. I don't know what actually woke me up, as the house seemed silent, but I instantly noticed my brother was not in his bed. My eyes widened, and I looked all around the room, calling out his name in a whisper. I felt protective of my little brother, and I was really worried about him. I almost wanted to cry when I saw that his jacket was missing. We both had been hanging them up on the handles of the closet door, but his was gone. I grabbed mine and rushed downstairs. From the bottom of the steps was a hallway. On one side was the front door, and on the other was the back door. Looking at the back door, the screen door was closed, but the actual door was open. I remember being scared, but more than anything, I wanted to make sure my little brother was okay. So, I walked outside. Out in the field behind the house, I could see 2 figures, one large and one small. They seemed to be walking away from the house, but it was dark and hard to tell. I walked a bit closer, then gathered the courage to yell my brother's name. Both figures stopped for a moment, and then the smaller one started running towards me. My baby brother ran into my arms. His eyes were watery. I looked back up, and the other figure was still standing in the field, looking in our direction. I led my brother back inside and up to our bedroom. I asked what had happened and what he was doing outside. All he would say was that he was scared of the dark, but Drew wanted to play a game. I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't care. Waking up a 6-year-old and leading them outside in the middle of the night was not okay. I kept my brother close for the rest of the holiday, but now I wish I had told someone about it. I was a shy kid that didn't want to be the center of any drama, and I didn't think anyone would believe me, so I kept my mouth shut about it. That was a horrible Christmas, though, and I think about it a lot. I've asked my brother years later what that Drew guy was doing, but even now, he says he doesn't remember. He only remembers being scared. My cousin never brought him to any more gatherings, so I'm assuming things didn't work out. I'm glad I saved my brother from whatever was going to happen that night, but I think back to it a lot, wishing that I had done more. Christmas for my family is probably similar to most other families. My wife and I tell our son that Santa brings presents on the night of Christmas Eve, and then on Christmas morning, we wake up our son and let him open the presents. It's a very typical Christmas, so of course on Christmas Eve, my kid wanted to make cookies for Santa, and we left out a small plate alongside a cup of milk before I sent him to bed. Then, after waiting an hour to make sure he was asleep, I began putting all of the gifts under the tree. Once I was finished piling them up, I went over to the small coffee table and took a few bites of the cookies to make it look like Santa came. Feeling satisfied with my work, I turned all the lights off and joined my wife in bed. The next morning, my wife woke our kid up and he ran downstairs to open his presents. He was so excited, screaming that Santa came. I always loved seeing his reaction to the gifts, but it was over after about an hour. He went off to play with his new toys, and my wife and I started cleaning up the wrapping paper and boxes. But that's when I noticed the cookies. Well, the lack of cookies, actually. They were all gone. We had put out a whole plate, and I had only eaten one. Confused, I walked over to my wife and asked her about it, though I knew she was in bed the whole time. She laughed at me, making a joke as if I ate the entire plate, but her smile faded when she realized my concern. I went over to my son and asked him if he had some cookies this morning, but his response only frightened and confused me more. He said he saw Santa eat them last night. Of course, I asked him what he meant, to which he replied that he woke up in the middle of the night and saw someone eating the cookies. I acted calm in front of him, making sure not to give the big secret away, as he was only 6, but I was seriously worried now. By the looks of it, my wife was too. It's such a weird, silly situation, but in reality, it was also terrifying, knowing that someone was inside our home. I took a quick look around upstairs, then searched the main floor before going over to the basement. Honestly, I hadn't been in the basement for months. It was unfinished, small, and dirty. The year before, we had our washer and dryer moved from the basement to the ground level floor. Ever since, we had no reason to go down there, so we just left it as an empty storage room. Anyway, I opened the door and turned on the dim lights. I waited several seconds before going down, thinking that if someone was there, they would make themselves known. With no other noises, I descended into the basement. From my initial look, I didn't see anything out of ordinary. There were boxes and dust, just like it had been left.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies. Like how I'm more than just...
But looking closer, a stack of the boxes seemed strangely put together. It kind of reminded me of when I was a kid and would position boxes to make a fort or a wall. I took a few steps closer before I could hear heavy breathing from behind the wall of boxes. I froze in place, shocked and scared. hoping that whoever was there stayed hidden so I could peacefully go back upstairs and call the police. I was not so lucky though. A disgusting, scrawny, middle-aged man stood up, looking me directly in the eyes. I was so shocked I didn't even move. It wasn't until the man quickly began climbing over the boxes that I turned around and sprinted as fast as I could up the stairs. His footsteps were not far behind mine as I pushed through the doorway and slammed the door behind me, seeing a glimpse of the man just a few steps down. I turned the lock and blocked the door with a nearby chair. My wife screamed and panicked at the chaos of the situation. She grabbed our son and ran upstairs, while I stood by the door and called the police. It's funny though, because my first thought while dialing 911 was how bad I felt for having to call someone on Christmas morning. Then again, my family's life was in danger. As I waited for the cops to show up, the man tried to persuade me to let him go and that he meant no harm. At one point, it even sounded like he was talking to himself. The guy sounded insane. I almost felt sorry for him. When the officer finally made it, he arrested the man with ease, and I filled out a report. We tried to not let this ruin the rest of Christmas, but it was difficult to get back into the joyful mood. It turned out he'd been squatting in our basement for anywhere between several days and a couple weeks. He'd been taking some of our food and drinks while we were gone too, which just made me feel sick. Thinking back, I'd even remembered things missing. Stupid things like the last granola bar being gone and everyone claiming it wasn't them. These are just normal things that you just chalk up to being anything other than someone living in your house and stealing your food. Now, I get a bad feeling in my gut every time something goes missing, as I remember that creepy guy staring at me and chasing me out of the basement. Being a delivery driver for several pizza places a few years back, I had a lot of experiences with weird customers or just strange things that would happen at night. But this one night takes the prize for the most disturbing and unusual situation. I had been working at the specific chain pizza shop for just under a year. I worked mid-shifts and night shifts alongside one other coworker for the most part. It would stay busy basically up until closing at 2 a.m., so there wasn't a ton of time to mess around, especially since it was just the two of us. I'll call my coworker Tom to keep his privacy. Tom was older than me by a few years and was a quiet, hard worker. He was in charge during the night shifts and would make all the pizzas while I would deliver them. Both of us would answer calls though, depending on who was busy and who wasn't. Anyway, it was just past 11 p.m. and I had gotten back from a delivery when the phone rang.
Most people don't know that you can get a domain from Squarespace. Not just a website. But you're not most people, because now you know you can get a domain from Squarespace.
Seeing Tom in the middle of making a pizza, I picked up the phone. A man on the other line spoke, asking for a large sausage pizza. I put in the order and asked if he needed anything else. The man didn't answer for a moment. Then he repeated himself, saying that he'd like a large sausage pizza. This time, I could tell through the way he mumbled it out that he was likely drunk. I confirmed that he just wanted one pizza, and the man said yes. I sent the order through, then grabbed my next delivery and dropped it off. Getting back to the shop, Tom had finished the guy's order and prepped it for delivery, so I grabbed it off the counter and ran to my car. I noticed, as I was grabbing the order though, Tom was giving me a weird look, as if he wanted to say something to me, but he decided not to. Again though, Tom was pretty quiet and soft-spoken, so it wasn't very odd. The address was a good 15 minutes away, but there was no traffic at this time, so I got there pretty early. The house was normal, but had a lot of land on either side, with the neighbors' homes barely visible through the trees. I got out and went around to the passenger door to pick up the pizza. Then I headed up to the porch and knocked on the door. A few seconds later, a man came and opened the door wide open. This wasn't all that strange, but I always found it odd when people would open their door that wide, as it was just unnecessary. But his face when he saw me seemed very confused and surprised, as if he hadn't expected to see me. Figuring he was just drunk and out of it, I handed him the box and told him his total, to which he slowly and awkwardly handed me cash, not saying anything. He held the box of pizza while standing in front of me and looked at it with a strange intensity. Then he moved his eyes up towards me, but not at me. He was looking over my shoulder like he saw something, but was just staring at it with that same intensity before shaking his head slowly like he was saying no. Getting really uncomfortable watching this man, I couldn't help but look back. I turned my head over my right shoulder and looked toward the driveway. Just a few feet from my car was a hooded man running back towards the trees. My heart jumped and I felt my body go into a sort of shock, trying to figure out what to do. I turned back around to face the man at the door, but he immediately stepped back and slammed the door shut. It all happened so fast, in just a matter of seconds, and gave me no time to react. With the door closed in front of me, I turned to face the hooded man again, but he was lost in the dark tree line. I stumbled off the porch and ran to my car, backing out of the driveway as soon as possible and driving back to work. I calmed myself during the drive, but still couldn't understand what happened. When I got back, I told Tom about the encounter, who seemed to have very little reaction and rather just told me to deliver the next order when I was ready. I did as he said, but on my way back from the delivery, I ended up pulling over and calling the police to let them know, just in case. They said they would have an officer check it out and call me back to update me. I got a call an hour later, and once I got out of work, I waited in the parking lot for the police to show up and talk to me. When the officer came up to my car, he mentioned that he talked to the man at the residence who matched the description I gave him, and the guy told the officer that he was just waiting for his buddy, Tom, to show up since he knew he worked at the pizza shop. When asked about the hooded man, he gave no details, saying he didn't know anything about that and he didn't see anyone. With that information, I was even more horrified and confused. I thought maybe they called thinking Tom was a delivery driver and were setting him up so that they could jump him. That would explain the hooded man by my car and the surprise of the guy at the door. I also think back to that look Tom gave me, thinking maybe he was going to warn me of something. I talked to Tom on multiple occasions about it though, but he gave me quick, useless answers, saying the guy was just an old friend and that he didn't know anything about anything. I moved on to another pizza shop very soon after that incident. But now that the horror of the situation is in the past, and I know it likely wasn't a target on me specifically, I enjoy trying to figure out the mystery. I still don't know for sure what the situation was, but it was by far the strangest and creepiest I've ever had. I was doing my Sunday night drives for extra money with DoorDash and Uber Eats. My friends show me how to use both at the same time and make more money per hour. One of the biggest issues with doing delivery services is that you have a lot of downtime where you just drive around waiting for an order to pop up. But if you work both apps at the same time, you can get rid of all that downtime and constantly be making money. So I was doing this for a few hours, racing back and forth between houses and restaurants, when I got a small order from a nearby restaurant, but the house was far away. These are the worst kinds of orders because you drive far and get paid less, though this one offered a large amount, meaning the tip must be crazy big. Accepting it, I picked up the order and began the 25-minute drive to their address. Halfway through the drive, while on a side road, I got a call from the app, assumingly being the customer. I answered, asking if this was my Uber Eats customer.
Adobe Creative Cloud is designed to be almost like a playground. It's a collection of
A man confirmed he was my customer and apologized profusely, saying he ordered from his friend's account and forgot to change the address. He said his house was just around the block though, and he proceeded to give me directions, telling me a couple turns to take once I reached the friend's house. I asked him for the address just in case I got lost, but he responded saying I'll see him outside waiting for him, then hung up. Obviously, this shit was not normal. However, I was more than halfway there at this point, and I gave the man the benefit of the doubt, as forgetting to switch it from your friend's address seemed like a legit thing that could happen. It could have also been the fact that I was a bigger guy that helped me convince myself to go through with the delivery, as I wasn't really afraid of anything. When I got to the supposed friend's house, I took the turns as the man had said and drove down a dimly lit neighborhood road until I reached a no outlet sign and saw the road ended just a few houses down. Feeling confident I had taken the turns as the man had said, I pulled over and grabbed my phone to call the customer. Just as I was clicking into my recent calls, a knock at my driver window made me jump. A bit embarrassed at how noticeably startled I was, I rolled the window down to greet him, but looking up at the man, his face had no emotion, just a completely straight, blank face. I let go of the window button and immediately pressed the lock button, which was followed by the man sticking a gun through the half-open window right at my head as he yelled out something. I heard more voices call back, followed by a group of people running up to the car and trying to open the door handles. They were all yelling commands at each other, but in the heat of the moment, I couldn't make out what they were saying. I was in a full-on shock, staring into the barrel of this guy's gun. If I had to guess, there were at least 5 or 6 people surrounding my car. In this moment, I don't even remember having any thoughts, but I can only describe it as more of a reflex type reaction, because when the man holding the gun looked away for a split second, I suddenly slammed on the gas, flooring it down the street. I'm surprised the man even held on to his gun as he pulled his hand out of the window just in time. Seeing the end of the road though, I quickly did a 3-point turn, and when I faced the other end of the street again, they were all gone. Not a single one of them anywhere on the road, sidewalk, or by the houses. They must have just fled the scene the instant I began driving. As soon as I made it out of the neighborhood, I called 911. These gang-type attacks are relatively common around here, but I never thought it would happen to me. Although nothing came of it, with nobody being found and every piece of evidence leading to nowhere, I see this event as a sort of wake-up call for me. I realized in the moment that the man put a gun to my head that being a big, confident man meant absolutely nothing. Taking a risk like that was purely stupid, because literally anyone with a weapon can have your life in their hands in an instant. If you work a job like this, or do anything where you see strangers regularly, be careful, because putting yourself in a risky situation with a stranger could be the last thing you ever do. During COVID, delivering groceries became pretty popular, and even after, people still had them delivered to their house. I was a picker for those orders, and when we were understaffed, which was pretty much all the time, I was also dropping them off. It wasn't a bad job. I actually enjoyed driving to people's homes. I got to see nice houses, and I didn't have to deal with the constant questions from customers, so I wasn't complaining. I got tips sometimes too, which was nice. Most of the time, though, I left the groceries at the doorstep, took a picture as proof, and then left. But I did have moments where I got to meet the people and help them take in the groceries. One instance was this older lady from Serbia. Her name was Vesna, and she loved me. We got to know each other, cause every Thursday she'd have pretty much the same stuff ordered to her house at the exact same time. The first few times I dropped off her groceries, she never came outside, but I'd catch her peeking out the window at me. I'd give a little wave, take my picture, then get back in the truck and leave. I think once she realized it was the same person delivering her groceries every time, she got more comfortable. She came out and greeted me. Then, slowly over time, I started bringing in the groceries for her and setting them on her counters. She was pretty old, so I was happy to help. And she also tipped nicely, too. The more I went, the more I got to know her. She was recently widowed and lived alone. All her children lived far away, and she only saw them once or twice a year for the holidays when she could take the train. She was also retired, but she used to be a broker, which explained her nice house. I always looked forward to Thursdays, and this one was no different. She had ordered everything on Monday, as she always did, and I was dropping off the following Thursday. When I pulled into the driveway, I immediately noticed that something was off. She wasn't at the door like she usually was, but the door was open. I also noticed that all her blinds were closed, which was strange. She always kept them open so her plants could get some sun. I went up to the open front door, and not seeing her, I rang the doorbell. I waited for a bit, but there was no answer. I knocked a few times, and there was no answer again, so I naturally started to become a little worried. She was old, so my immediate thought was maybe she fell or had a heart attack or something. I kinda stood there wondering what I should do. I thought maybe I should go inside, but I was also on the job, and I know the rules are that if no one answers, I just have to leave the groceries on the porch. Being her friend though, I decided it best to go inside and at least put her groceries on the counter like usual. The door was open after all. I grabbed all the bags in both of my hands and walked straight into the kitchen. All the lights were off and everything was quiet. Placing the bags on her counter, I called out her name, again, hearing no response. As I started walking out, calling the police crossed my mind, but I didn't really know how to explain this was an emergency, because what if she was just out of the house? Maybe she was just visiting someone, and I just wasted the police officer's time. I really was in a weird position, but I just knew something was wrong. But just as I got to the doorway leading outside, I heard movement in the house upstairs. I felt relieved for a moment, calling out for Vesna, but then there was again no response. No one came to the door or answered me. After a minute of standing there, I kept hearing shuffling movement, as if someone was moving stuff around upstairs, and started to feel really awkward and uncomfortable. I headed back outside and got in the car. I sat there for a little while, and after a minute, I saw the curtains on the second story move to the side as if someone was looking at me through the window. I pulled out and drove around the corner, then parked on the street and sat there, just really confused. I didn't know if it was her and she just didn't want to see anyone, or maybe one of her kids. I was also concerned with whether or not I should call the police. I drove off, went around the block, and then decided to drive by her house again. I sat there for a little while again, until I saw the upstairs curtains open. I saw a male figure look out, and then closed it quickly as if seeing my truck scared him. I knew Vesna had 2 daughters, and she had a son, but he had passed away years ago, so I'm not sure who could possibly be at her house with her not there, and where would she be anyway? I had been there too long though, and had to get back to work. The following week, there were no orders from her for the first time in almost a year. I drove by her house after I got off on Thursday, and in the driveway was an officer's car. When I got home, I searched her name and found that she had been filed as missing only a few days after I had been there to deliver her groceries. I noticed the date they said she was likely last at home though was the day after she had ordered the groceries. 2 days before I had gone to her house and saw that man. I went to the police with all the information I had. I don't know who that man was, or if I was close to having something happen to me as well. But it's been nearly 3 years now, and there have been no updates. I've been working at one of the largest cheese manufacturers for 5 years now. This cheese plant stays running 24/7, 365 days a year, and I work the night shift for the parts department, and it's pretty slow at times. We have one separate huge warehouse about 100 feet from the cheese plant, and in our warehouse we keep the big items like motors, pumps, cylinders, etc. We usually keep the warehouse doors unlocked because no one really goes into our warehouse except us parts guys. Our warehouse has those LED lights that turn on when it senses movement when you walk underneath it. There's about 35 lights all throughout the warehouse, and they're on a timer, so they eventually turn off after 10 minutes of non-movement. One night when I was working, it was really rainy and cold, and it was a steady night for the most part. It was about 1 a.m., and I had to go to our warehouse to get a motor off the rack with a forklift. I opened the garage door and proceeded to enter the warehouse with the forklift.
Think Verizon's best 5G network is expensive? Think again. This season, bring in your AT&T or T-Mobile bill to a Verizon store for a better deal. Then use those unwanted bills to wrap up goodbye gifts to AT&T. Or cut them into snowflakes to celebrate your switch from T-Mobile. 'Tis the season to save at Verizon. Just bring in your bill to your local Verizon store and we'll give you a better deal.
Upon entering, I noticed in the back corner of the warehouse that the LED motion light was on. The corner was about 50 feet or more from me, and none of the other lights were on except the back corner light. It was kind of odd, but I didn't think anything of it, and began to pull the motor off the rack. Once I threw the motor on the pallet, I heard footsteps from that back corner where the LED light was on. Hello? Is someone there? I didn't hear any response, so I was thinking to myself I was probably just hearing stuff. I drove the forklift out of the warehouse with the motor and took it to the maintenance guys. I talked to the maintenance guys for about 30 minutes and took a cigarette break too. I finally went back to our warehouse at about 2 a.m. to close the garage door that I had left open. I walked up to the garage door and glanced into the back corner of the warehouse and saw that the LED light was now turned off. I closed the door and was walking back to the main door to exit the warehouse, but then I heard footsteps again and saw the back corner LED light turn on, followed by a row of lights turning on as if someone was walking towards me. As the lights were turning on, I saw a man dressed in all black emerge from the darkness. He had tattoos all over his face and looked me straight in the eyes. I humbled a few words out, saying, "Who are you?" He looked at me without saying anything. I'm 6'2", so I knew I could take the guy if he tried to rush at me. I told him he shouldn't be in here, but he still didn't say anything and continued to give me the sinister look on his face. I called security on the radio and told them to come to the warehouse as we had an unauthorized person on the property. Once he heard me call security, the man pulled a knife from his pocket and I backed up, staring at the knife. The man stood still and didn't even move. Before long, we heard security outside the warehouse, and then the man ran towards the back door while I just stood there. Security rushed into the warehouse and asked where he went, and I told them he went out the back door. They looked around the warehouse just in case, but they couldn't find the guy. Once 6 a.m. came around, I told my supervisor about what happened, and he said he would check the security cameras to see where the guy ran off to. All the footage showed was the guy jumping over our barbed wire fence and entering our warehouse. Since that day, my supervisor has made us lock the warehouse doors at all times. I just think about what that guy would have done if I hadn't called security. I took my dog for regular walks around my neighborhood every night after dinner. There was nothing ever interesting about the walks. I basically just went around the block and then back home. For context, I'm a female in my late 20s and I live in a middle-class neighborhood. The town is considered very safe though, with a low crime rate, and I've never felt that I was in danger for the whole 15 years I've lived here, except for this one night. It was just past 7, and I got home and ate a quick frozen dinner. Then I got my dog ready for the walk. It was winter, so the sun set early and it was dark, though The town does well at keeping the streets and sidewalks mostly lit up with streetlights. As I walked, I turned the corner that connects to a path that goes directly alongside a park. This was my usual walk, as it makes a nice circle back to my house and takes a perfect 15 minutes. It was a quiet night, which wasn't uncommon during winter here. I stood on the snowy sidewalk, watching my dog sniff around a tree. Then I started looking around the park when I noticed a car parked on the side of the road up ahead right next to the sidewalk I was on. All of its headlights were off, but the light inside the car was on, and I could see someone moving around in the front seat. I tried not to make it obvious that I was looking at them, just in case they saw me, but I was really curious about what they were doing. The location they were parked at was not really near any houses, and it was a bit late and cold, so I wasn't sure what they were doing. I wasn't worried or anything, I was just unsure. I tugged my dog's leash and started walking along the path again. Getting closer, I saw that it was a man, and he seemed to be looking for something in his car, searching frantically through his glove box. I was still half looking and half looking away, trying not to be noticed, when the man suddenly looked up and made eye contact with me. My first reaction was to look away, but then I looked back. I was only 10 or 15 feet from his car at this point, and the man held his hand up in a friendly gesture and rolled his window down. "Excuse me, would you mind helping me out with something?" he yelled through his window. The man looked around my age, and just like any other guy, I asked him what he needed, and he basically just said something was wrong with his car and it wouldn't move, but he was using a lot of car words that I didn't even understand. Regardless though, I was of no use to him. "I'm sorry, I can't really help with that," I responded, pulling my dog and starting to walk again. Taking several more steps down the path, I heard the faint sound of the window rolling back up, followed by the car turning on, and a few seconds later, driving away.
Stop taking meeting notes and let ClickUp AI Note Taker do it for you. It allows you to focus on your meetings, not your notes. It captures everything, from action items to key decisions. And after every call, you get a clear summary. But where it really goes to the next level is that it's the only AI Note Taker that connects your...
I turned around, watching the man drive his small car down the road as if nothing was wrong at all. Seeing that made my stomach drop, and after a few seconds, I turned back around and started walking a bit faster. I was still 10 minutes from the house, and my mind was racing, thinking about that guy and how disturbing it was to see him drive off like that after he was asking for my help, telling me his car didn't work. I continued another 5 minutes down the path, until I got to the end portion where it goes behind a few houses before leading to the back of a neighborhood that takes me to my house. This part was darker and secluded. I walked even quicker to try and get out as soon as I could, but at the very end of the path, on the dark neighborhood street, was that same car from earlier. I could only see the very front of the car, but I still recognized it. It looked like he was parked in a way so that he was trying not to be seen. I turned around, pulling my dog with me and beginning to jog in the other direction, back the way we came. When we got back to the park, I turned down the street and took a long route home that kept me nearby other houses. Thankfully, he didn't seem to be able to find me. My heart was still racing when I got home, and I called the police to let them know about the guy, but that's when I realized I didn't get the license plate. What's worse is that a few nights later, I saw that man's same car again, parked by the path I walked on. This time though, all of the lights were off. I called the police, who came and searched it just to find that nobody was inside. Checking the license plate number, they found that it was actually a stolen car. Knowing this, I got a really sick feeling thinking about my encounter with the man. Feeling so safe for all my life, living in a place like that, and yet I came dangerously close to having something terrible happen to me. I often find myself thinking about what the man was frantically looking for in his glove box. I don't know for sure what that man wanted, but I don't ever want to know. This happened last year. I was at home taking a shower before bed. It was later than I usually stayed up, but I had a lot of work to get done, and I didn't have work the next day. I stood in the shower, winding down after the long day, when I heard something. A click. It was faint, but it sounded like it was from inside the house. I thought it was some sound the house made, no big deal at all, and continued showering, until I heard it again, right outside the bathroom door. I rinsed real quick, then turned the shower off. I got out and got dressed, trying to think of what that noise could possibly be. Opening the door, I immediately noticed the hallway light was off, which I knew I had left on. At first I thought it was just the power cutting out, until I looked at the light switch on the other side of the wall. It was switched off. I quickly looked down both ends of the hallway, a little shaken, then flicked the lights back on. They worked, just as normal. I walked down the hallway towards the stairs, seeing that it was completely dark downstairs as well. One manual light switch turning off on its own is weird enough, but two, that told me this wasn't a coincidence. There was something going on. I stood at the top of the steps for a minute, trying to think of what to do next. I really didn't know what was going on, but someone breaking into my house just to turn off my lights seemed like a really risky, sick joke for some random person to pull on me. The longer I just stood there, though, the more anxious and creeped out I became. I began walking down quietly, and when I got to the middle steps, the extremely loud sound of my back door slamming shut echoed through the silent house. I jumped, then froze in a panic. I was too scared to move, and my heart was beating rapidly. After a minute of no more sounds, I went down and turned on the lights. On the tile floors were clear boot prints, probably from the mud and dirt surrounding my house. Then I looked down the hall toward the back door, seeing it was shut, but even from where I was standing, I could tell it wasn't locked. I ran down and locked it, then checked the front door, which was already locked. I knew I kept both the back door and front door locked at all times, especially the back door, because I never used it. Strangely though, all the windows were still locked and intact, so whoever it was must have found a way to unlock the back door. I called the police as soon as I could, but to put it simply, they were pretty much useless. Checking around the place, nothing was missing, at least nothing important that I would have noticed right away. Maybe it was just some sick joke, but they didn't even stay around to get a good laugh at my reaction, so what was the point? Over the next few months, I was on high alert. Every sound the house made gave me chills, and I was paranoid about locking my doors, checking them 4 or 5 times a night. So far, still living in the same house, nothing else has happened. Though just 2 months ago, I woke up and noticed that the back door was unlocked again. However, by then I wasn't checking the locks every night, so I figured I must have forgotten to lock it. I don't know though, part of me thinks it was that intruder again. There's also a part in my mind that thinks it may be something paranormal, but I'm still not sure. But whatever it was they were trying to do still creeps me out, and I plan on moving away very soon.